All right, guys, this is turn of the century one. And what we're going to be looking at is um, basically it's kind of a review of everything that we've been talking about and how society is affected by what's going on and a lot of the changes in society. So, in the first section, it's basically a main review of what we talked about in the last one with urbanization. And you guys should recall some of the main problems that we were talking about with mass transit. There's too many people, water, sanitation, sewage, pollution, crime, fire. So, we talked about a lot of that stuff. So what we're going to get into with this is those advancements in science and technology that help to solve some of those problems, especially the problem of overcrowding and transportation of a large amount of people. So the first thing, and like I said, we've made note of this last chapter, is skyscrapers. And this here is the Flatiron Building in New York City. If you've been there, you might have seen this. It's pretty popular on a lot of TV shows and those types of things. And one thing that you need to understand, and we've made this connection before, is the importance of steel in the construction of skyscrapers. So steel frames, they're stronger and actually they're lighter. So you can build more, you can build higher, and they can hold the weight of all the floors on top of it. Well, one of the problems with skyscrapers was going to the 20th, 30th floor. It took people a really long time to get up there. So elevators were extremely important, and they had these things called dumbwaiters as well. These dumbwaiter systems, they're a lot like just mini elevator systems. So they had some of those to carry equipment, and then they just made them bigger to be able to carry people, and that's where we get elevators. All right, so elevators in as well. I'm at home working on this, so we'll see. I'm hoping I didn't skip any. No, I didn't. All right, so next was mass transit. And we talked a lot about the different types of mass transit in the last chapter here. And this on the right side of your screen here are just different types. You guys have seen these. Obviously, this is working through time. So the first one was an omnibus. These are it's a horse-drawn carriage, basically, where you have the carriage and you can fit a lot of people in here. And then you have it fixed to a track. Those are the horse cars. I know we talked about those. Last chapter, the cable cars is when we get electricity, and that's where it's got that little rod on top that's connected to the internet. It's connected to electricity, and then electric trolleys are the same. I'm sorry, I got those two mixed up. Cable cars have the cable running underneath. Trolleys have that. That's my bad. We're okay. And then motor buses, obviously, that's after 1906. With the internal combustion engine. This does lead to the growth of subways. It leads to making commuting easier for people, and it allows them to live in different parts of the city. So one thing that we're gonna finish this video on the three major changes in cities. One is people begin to design cities. All right, so you see blocks being made, and they start to actually plan the city. So you have these people called city planners, and they start creating things with bridges, parks, skyscrapers. We'll go through that. We're going to see a change in communication as well. We're going to see high-speed printing presses, which means you are able to get more information out faster. We see something called a linotype machine, and then we get introduced to photography at the turn of the century. Now, photographs were around in the mid 1800s to 1860s because we see stuff from the Civil War, but that was not for everyday use. At the turn of the century, we do get cameras called the Kodak camera that everybody could afford and use, and we'll talk about that later. Paper became really inexpensive as well, just because they started making it a little bit different. And then we've talked a little bit about transportation already, and we'll get into that in a little bit more. So first off is urban planning. And what happened is they wanted a natural setting for people. So this is where we get parks. So if you think about Ontario and you have Marshall Park there, and there's different parks for people to go to and kids to go to. And the reason they did that is because of this thing called leisure time. And this connects us to the labor movement, where labor unions started arguing and wanting more time off to spend with their families. And so what they got was this thing called leisure time. Well, now that they had that time, they needed a place to go and somewhere time. And that's where parks come into play. And then also that's where theme parks are going to come into play as well, like Cedar Point, stuff like that. We'll get to that later as well. And then also the systematic design for city blocks. We saw that in the last chapter when we looked at Chicago. So we saw that. And then new technologies, connected cities, whether it was communication or transportation, new technologies were connecting different cities throughout the country. So this here is an overview of Central Park in New York City. So what this offers the people of New York is a natural setting to go. If you guys see everything on the outside, it's mostly gray. So whether it's a building or concrete or whatever, it's mostly gray. So when you go into Central Park, you see green. And if you get into the psychology of it, it's really interesting to look at how the different colors from the leaves and from the greens actually make people feel better, and where gray and different shades of gray actually make you feel worse. So mental health, there's an issue there as well. This here, we're sticking with New York, and you can see here, this is the island of Manhattan, and you have different bridges going into Manhattan. If you remember back to the Men Who Built America series, there was the one bridge that went across for the railroads, and Vanderbilt had control of that. And then over here on the right is the subway system in New York City today. This is obviously, as time progresses, things change, and you get roads. So now we have interstates and highways, where we used to just have subways and fixed routes. So now we have these roads here. So this is what it looks like today. Communication, printing and paper became less expensive. What that means is that we're actually able to get information out faster. So if you think about the internet, what the internet did is the internet allowed us to get information almost instantaneous. Well, if you print paper slow, you can only print it about once a week. If you're able to print it faster, you're able to print it once a day, which means you're able to get information faster. So this was a fun time for people because they were able to get information almost daily. All right. And information was traveling faster because airplanes were created in 1903. One of their first uses within the first 10 years was to carry mail. So people were able to, instead of, you would write somebody and your letter would get there in 3 or 4 weeks, and then it would take 3 or 4 weeks for them to write you back. So it was 2 months before you had heard from somebody. Well, now that time frame was actually being shortened into weeks rather than months. So that was pretty interesting as well. Speaking of airplanes, you have this video here for the Wright brothers that I expect you to watch. It's pretty interesting. And this here is an interesting video about the Kodak camera. One interesting thing with this is the fact that actually have to mail in the entire camera, and it would take about a month, and then you would get your camera back. They would reload film in the camera, and it would take about 100 photos, and they would give you all your photos. So basically you would be without a camera for a month. So I know that would be difficult for some of you, not being able to take pictures of your food and whatnot, but there was a time where people just didn't have cameras, and people just lived in the moment rather than, hey, let's take a picture of this and post it to whatever. We're going to go ahead and end this video here. We're going to get back into some other things that we're going to talk about that we've already talked about. So that's the first video. Thank you. That was Turn of the Century 1.